Evening, everyone, and welcome to another live stream here from Empty Cloud Monastery. This evening, we're happy to have with us again our guest speaker, Khenmo Drolma, who started with a two-part talk last week and will be giving the final part this week. So welcome, Khenmo. Always wonderful having you with us. Khenmo Drolma is the abbess of Vajra Dakini, which is a small Bhikkhuni monastery located in Maine. How many monastics do you have living with you these days?
Oh, we're waiting for travel to work again.
Right. Yeah.
Are you getting there's an echo?
Yes, there's an audio echo, but it might go away when I mute my microphone. Anyway, so I'll go ahead and pass things over to Khenmo to give this evening's Dharma program. Thank you.
So we'll begin with the four boundless ones or four immeasurables. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness which is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. So we always begin with an aspiration prayer, setting our hearts and mind in a field of bodhicitta. So I was talking last week about this response to COVID that our lineage quickly made worldwide. And it's many practices, but the simplest practice is this particular Tara that was done by the head of the lineage or given by the head of the lineage as his heart advice, the Tara for Epidemics. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about how we understand this kind of practice. It may seem a little bit different from the kinds of practices that you normally do in the Thai forest tradition. But it's not as different as you might think. So I was contemplating what we learned from other lineages this week, because one of the delights of having so much Dharma online is that I've been able to sit in with the Upaya Zen Center periodically and learn a little bit about koan practice. So that's not something we practice at all in the Tibetan tradition. And it's been a little bit of a mystery for me, and I was curious about it. So what I found in opening the door of another lineage is all of the Buddhist traditions are taking a different approach to the same ultimate fruition, which is a breaking of the ignorance of self, holding self dear, the cherishing of self that is the root cause of our personal anger and global strife of every variety. And so the koan tradition is quite mysterious. It's story-like and sort of like non-solvable story riddles. So it invites your mind to break the construct of conceptual duality by giving something that you can't respond to in any rational way. And so the Tibetan approach, or the Vajrayana approach, also is working with this same conundrum. We have the philosophy, we have the logical ways that we can look at the non-findable self. We have logical ways of seeing theory, but in terms of our practice life, how do we approach the experience of non-dual understanding? How can we even begin to take steps that might break that barrier, that conundrum? So with visualization, and in this case, we're visualizing ourselves as Tara, or it could be any image that you have of fruition. We're seeing what it's like to sit in that seat. And in many ways, it's a little bit like taking a pilgrimage. When we go on a pilgrimage, we go to a sacred site. We go to a place where that realization has manifested in the life of the Buddha. We might go to Bodh Gaya. We might go to the seat of the great lineage teachers. But there's a sense of traveling from our safe sense of home and security into a new space. And when we visit a space like that, for instance, Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha achieved enlightenment, there is a quality to that small geographic area that is palpably different. There's a softness, there's a mutual reverence that creates harmonious conditions for everyone who's practicing there and circumambulating there. And there is a resonance of that historic moment. And we might say that resonance, since it is non-dual, pervades even the elements that are there. So when we're imagining ourselves as Tara, we're not trying to turn into a different person. We're trying to sit on the seat of that resonance, of that realization, and look out with our mind with that not constructed boundary that separates self and other. So we're trying to intentionally set up a field of experience in which we can practice as though. We can experiment with what does it like to see all sentient beings as beloved? What is it like to have a relaxation of the defenses and eventually a relaxation of that mediating I, that mediating narrative that qualifies everything we think about and see. And it's approached as a experiential softening of the boundary as opposed to something logical or rational. And it is also reinforced by this field of loving kindness, this field of bodhicitta. So with this field of bodhicitta, when we have a sense of no lack, no imperfection, no shame, no guilt, no holding back, when we can let our heart fully just relax and open, then actually we are starting to be inseparable from that realization, even if it is momentary. But we have this pilgrimage to Tara, to the Tara realization, as a way of prompting that forgetting of the dominant I that so qualifies everything we're experiencing. So it's a way of disassociating from our history of being in this body, this identity, which is actually quite difficult experientially to drop, and to open to a potential of not making it so overwhelmingly present, to soften it. let's say. And so that's the great skillful means of the Vajrayana, really working with compassion and loving kindness and dropping our firm fixation on identity. And with the expansiveness of the loving kindness and compassion, after we fill ourselves up, just as in the meditation that many of you are familiar with, we allow that to expand. And as we're allowing it to expand, we can see more clearly where our boundaries start to make themselves known again. And in that moment, relax, return to Tara's presence, and become bigger. Our heart mind becomes bigger. In the Tibetan system, mind is located at the heart. So it is quite a skillful means to use our natural altruism, our ever increasing and developing loving kindness and compassion as we're walking the path of the Dharma, to use that as a skillful means to break that boundary, to transcend that boundary, to relax and dissolve that boundary into a non-dual realization. So I wanted to talk about a couple other topics before we started meditation. I talked to you last time about Lord Jigten Sumgun, that when he fully manifested that realization, he did experience great, what we would call healing, but the healing is the realization, and his body was healed. In just as many Tibetan stories, there is that realization without any change in the circumstance of the body. And so Green Tara's counterpart is White Tara, and White Tara is one in which the body doesn't change, and yet she is the Tara of long life, the Tara of healing, what we think of in terms of all of the practices in those general areas. And so White Tara was a historic aristocrat, and all of the stories and scenarios are more or less the same. So extraordinary privilege in a castle, like Siddhartha. So she's in the castle, but somehow she contracts leprosy. So leprosy is very common because it was the life-threatening, no cure disease of the early times. So she got leprosy, and some monks were passing by, and they said, "Oh, if you go on a pilgrimage to Chenrezig, there's this wonderful temple far, far away. If you go on a pilgrimage, anyone who goes there experiences great blessing, and you have an opportunity to experience some healing of your leprosy." So you can imagine someone who has lived such an isolated, cloistered life then makes the pilgrimage traditionally on foot. And so someone that isolated would encounter all of the different kinds of suffering of all of the different kinds of people, sickness, old age, and death, and would have many, many experiences on the slow walk to the temple. So she got to the temple, and they said, "Oh, we're so sorry. No one who's not been vaccinated can come in here." So essentially, if you have leprosy, you're not allowed in the sacred space. So at that point, she was overjoyed to reach the temple, overjoyed to see the statue of the great Chenrezig, who is the form we visualize for ultimate compassion, ultimate bodhicitta, ultimate loving kindness. And so she just sat at the gate and kept practicing. And she was so joyful that people brought her food to eat and, whatever she needed. And the statue inside the temple could sense her presence and was so sad that she wasn't allowed in the monastery, in the temple, that a tear rolled down his cheek and rolled across the dusty courtyard and touched her robe. And she received the last obstacle being removed and experienced complete liberation. And when the monk was telling this story the first time I heard it, he started laughing and laughing and laughing. And he said, nothing changed. Her body didn't change. She still had leprosy, but she was enlightened. So we do understand that this quest for healing is a quest for this non-dual realization, this immense bodhicitta, or you could say the flavor of the non-dual realization is loving kindness and compassion, that they're inseparable like a candle flame and heat. And so you might be able to think of it, if there is no self and no other, then there is nothing that in any way obscures the great open-hearted loving kindness and compassion. There's only the beingness of loving kindness and compassion and the absence of self, effort, and other receiving, any activity, any object, any receiving. So that is how the development of compassion works in the Vajrayana understanding. So I'm going to see if it works that I can share the screen. Let's give it a quick try. Otherwise, I'll guide everyone through the meditation just directly. Okay. Okay, nothing is happening. So the meditation that we're working with, Tara, and you can, as I said, visualize in an outer way, any way that you imagine that form of the realization might be. It could be of a great historic teacher. It could be the Buddha in the traditional pose. So you're visualizing yourself in that way so that you can get a little closer to the open-hearted, open-minded state, so that you can disassociate from the fixed I and identity that we operate with from day to day. The first stage of meditation then is generating bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is a word that encompasses, we don't actually in English have an English word that encompasses loving kindness and compassion. So we see Tara within our hearts, and Tara is emanating green light, and that light is moving through our body, through our heart mind, through our continuum. And any illness or confusion falls away. And then when we feel full with that bodhicitta, we start expanding that bodhicitta. And it's a wonderful way of connecting in an open-hearted way with the suffering of the world, not turning away from it, not becoming overwhelmed by it, but sending that quality of loving kindness and compassion to those areas that are experiencing great difficulty in the moment. So, as the different degrees of illnesses are migrating around the world, as they're, difficult, even more difficult areas, hospitals being overwhelmed, you might think of something particular in your neighborhood. You might be thinking of someplace far away, just not giving it a lot of conceptual story, but just seeing that green healing light of Tara going out and assuaging the suffering of that area. And this is important as well, because one of the qualities that strengthens this dualistic mind is being afraid to see the suffering of others, being afraid to even look at the deep pain as a way of protecting the self and keeping it isolated from the suffering of the world. Whereas in this meditation, we open in a very clear-hearted way with this green light. So we don't meet overwhelm, and we don't meet helplessness. So we allow our constructed boundaries to dissolve as this field of loving kindness and compassion starts to move out from our hearts. Then the fourth stage, or the third stage, depending on how we're counting, is to imagine a Tara in front of each of our nostrils. And as we've been practicing this in our morning practice, we can also imagine a visualization of Tara like a face mask, not only in front of our nostrils, but in front of all of our sense gates. So this stage of practice is also very helpful because it acknowledges that we are seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, and making judgments of pleasant or unpleasant, for or against, qualifications of many different kinds through each sense gate. And with Tara at the sense gates, we start to see the phenomenal world as inseparable from Tara, in the same way that earlier we were visualizing ourselves inseparable from Tara. So it's a similar skillful means in that we are not objectifying the phenomenal world as having anything other than the emptiness inseparable from Tara, in the same way that earlier we were seeing ourselves not with our constructed eye, but as that rainbow-like presence of Tara with no form and no constructed identity. So now we're working with the phenomenal world in the same way, breathing out through the Taras and then exhaling back in through the Tara, into the Tara at our hearts. So this is a sophisticated understanding of working with emptiness of phenomena and emptiness of self, but it also can be very much a lived way of working with the circumstances that we're in today, where we're going into different arenas. You may go to the supermarket or the post office, or, any of the shopping centers. And anytime you're with groups of people, well, where you are, of course, there are subways and offices and buses and things like that. So instead of responding with a shutting down in fear, we're seeing that the whole phenomenal world is inseparable from Tara ultimately in the same way we are, so we can relax our heart mind, not in any way putting aside the common sense precautions that we're taking during this era of COVID, but looking at our mental state as we're moving through people in a fearless way, at our colleagues in a fearless way, at our gatherings with all kinds of relatives who have all kinds of contexts in a fearless way. So if we look at some of the poetry in the Vajrayana texts, they might say, all beings are arising as Tara, all the sounds we hear are her mantra. And so we're not taking in the sense information in the way we did before. We're seeing its inherent emptiness as Tara. So let's work with this visualization now. And the first part is setting up a field of bodhicitta as Tara. So let's just relax with that and just relax in such a peaceful, unguarded way that you can allow your heart to do what it really wants to do, which is to be soft and loving. And the example that is often used is the feeling that you get when you see a gorgeous small toddler smiling and walking towards you. And we might think in this time period as our beloved animal friends, a puppy coming toward us or a cat coming toward us. And there's a unmediated response of joyous receptivity and love to these little kittens or puppies. So we're not trying to work hard on the story. We're trying to get into that field of mind where we can relax in this open-hearted, peaceful, loving quality. And that is the sense of Tara in our hearts. And that Tara is sending a green healing light, penetrating every cell, penetrating our confused thoughts and fears. And we'll just sit with that, filling up completely, just getting the confidence of that strength of bodhicitta and the healing nature of holding that realization and sustaining that realization. So let's sit with this for about 5 minutes. It also helps to physically smile as you're opening to that realization. Then this green healing light of Tara's bodhicitta overflows without any sense of depletion, like a mist coming through your mouth, nose, and pores. And this we understand in different degrees. At first, we see, oh, but I need it. I want to keep it for my own healing. Then we see, oh, what if I don't have enough? Then we see how is it that everyone is deserving? Maybe only these people are deserving. And then we start to see a universal softness of no boundaries. And then over time, everything relaxes with no Tara, no activity, and no recipient. So each and every time we work with this practice, we might have a very different experience, and that's perfectly okay. So we're continuously learning about our mind and what our growing edge is. So without criticizing or judging, we see a limitation arise and relax until we open in realization and relaxed heart-mind to no boundary whatsoever, no definition, only the beingness. So enjoy your journey this evening and what you learn this evening about your practice. And we'll take another 5 minutes with this. The mist is radiating from you, your home, your neighborhood, your community, and wherever you're hearing the cries of suffering. And then allow a spiritual face mask, Tara in front of each nostrils, and you might play with Tara in front of your ears or in front of your eyes, thinking about how easily we take offense from things we hear or offended by things we see, facial expressions, gestures. And imagine taking in everything as Tara's activity, hearing only her mantra. And in this time, when we're so afraid of breathing, whether it's pollution or COVID particles, relaxing the fear so that our mental state can continually be that fountain of bodhicitta. So let's rest in this for just a few minutes. In terms of how our traditions are similar, if we think of basic calm abiding meditation or shamatha or the training on attention to the breath, here we're working with a different object of meditation, but we're doing that same training. So it could be the feeling of bodhicitta, or it could be the visualization of Tara, either at your heart or as the form. So there is a continuous mindful attention to not losing that feeling and returning again and again to generating that feeling. So that's where the shamatha aspect is in the meditation. And then we might think of Tara at all our different sense gates as then the mindfulness of moving through our environments maintaining mindfulness as we arise from the cushion in the same way we might be doing walking meditation or maintaining mindfulness as we're doing the dishes or any of the activities. Here we're keeping a mindfulness of Tara at all of our sense gates. And then the relaxing and dissolving of boundaries is an exploration of Vipassana. So we can think of it simply or complexly. In our tradition, even the simplest meditation is thought to be complete as a perfect path when we understand the profound aspect of what really is going on. And then another thing about this meditation that's quite lovely is that the tradition is to do it at daybreak. So here in Maine, I'm aware that we are in the land where the sun hits first. And so holding this realization to the best of our ability of this open-hearted loving kindness and compassion as the sunlight is starting to move its way across the land and across the globe, it's as though this connection of non-dual expression is like the sunlight moving as a pervasive emptiness quality with the sun around the globe. So this time of year, when we're doing our morning meditation here in Maine, it's dark. And so I have the direct experience of contemplating the dawn and contemplating the sunlight moving and touching all sentient beings without any discrimination, lower, higher, good, better, best, in the same way that our loving kindness and compassion is moving through the world with no judgment or separation. So now we have some time for questions or insights from your meditation this week or last week. You may have tried this meditation on your own in between.
Okay, so at this time, if anyone has any questions or comments, please bring them forward. I actually have one. So Khenmo, when you were giving the first part of the instructions, the part of imagining oneself as Tara Buddha, the way you were describing it sounded like this could be taken as a practice of anatta, of the perception of non-self. I was understanding that correctly? Could you explain a bit more about that?
Yes, from our perspective, we can study philosophy. We can approach it rationally, but then when we're on the cushion, we still have the habitual patterns of our lived reality, and the realization of non-self is a lived realization, and it's not just intellectual. And so the idea of disconnecting from your habitual construction of identity, in this case, me as Khenmo, by visualizing myself as Tara in a translucent rainbow body, it weakens the hold of that body associated, the predominant sense of I that's associated with the body. In the same way, then working with the realization or working with the bodhicitta as a heart-mind experience, I might feel limitations very easily arise in my constructed identity as Khenmo, fewer and fewer, I hope. But if I imagine my capacity unlimited, where I haven't been wounded, I don't have arguments or grudges or, anything that we all might have traces of, I can relax and strengthen an association of what that field of mind is like, as opposed to my identity that might have preferences.
Okay, thank you. That helps quite a bit. So if anybody else has questions, you can bring them up at this time.
It's a different way of approaching it. In the same way that my very limited and new experience with koans, how interesting this work is, like a surprise through the back door of my mind, working with koans. So each of the great practice paths have different kinds of skillful means that work with different mentalities.
So Khenmo, one part of the meditation that I found very challenging was the one of visualizing multiple taras. So like one tara within the body.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's still incredibly difficult since it's not a practice I'm used to doing. But it was something I could get some handle on. But imagining multiple taras outside the body in front of the nostrils as well, that was a bit much. I think also there's a conceptual breakdown in that I can think of one Buddha, but multiple Buddhas simultaneously around my body was a bit beyond the stretch of my current thinking. So what are your thoughts on this?
It's almost like, I think without the current crisis, it might have been a little more difficult for me as well to get into. But now I'm so used to putting on face masks, it's as though there's a small Tara painted on a face mask, an imaginary face mask. So you can make it really, really simple. You can think of a green circle. You can think of the word Tara, and not, gradually build a strength of visualization, but not let the sort of conceptual mind make it difficult for you. The final part, especially these days, when we're going in and out of different spaces, to think of lessening our fear by seeing as though the realization of Tara is a filter that transmutes fear and or how we might imagine disease in a concrete way. I find really helpful and practical. But you can make it easier for yourself by even just imagining, even a capital T, for instance, something like that, and then allowing familiarity over time to build. You were just traveling, so and people may be traveling for the holidays. So watching our mentality going from open-hearted, let's say in our houses, feeling as though we can generate love, and then walking out the door into crowded spaces and experiencing our minds closing down in fear. It's a way of bringing attention to that and allowing this spiritual protection of the thought of Tara's great realization to allow the mind to relax in fearlessness. And I think we make it overcomplicated at first. If I were to say, for you, it might be imagine a Buddha, a Buddha figure. But I bet if I said imagine Mickey Mouse, just about everybody with an American childhood could imagine Mickey Mouse pretty quickly. So if you think you can't visualize, just see, oh, it's because I'm not familiar with this Tara image. If I think about a familiar image, I can imagine it pretty easily. So if I allow Tara to become familiar, then it will be easy to imagine Tara in front of my nostrils.
Yeah, actually on that point, I find it much easier to visualize a Shakyamuni image because I'm used to seeing them all the time.
Right.
Whereas it takes a little more effort to call to mind any of the Tibetan representations of a Buddha image.
And the thing about the Tibetan images, it was a non-literate society. So in the Tibetan culture, everybody's familiar with Tara. And the paintings are not creative whim of an artist. They're actually strict philosophical teachings. Every element, every dimension, every garment, every quality of the painting has a philosophical meaning. So within the culture, people look at the painting and say, oh, Tara, and I look at her ornaments, that's the 6 perfections. I look at the color, and that's the quality of the winds of compassion going out. So part of it is a cultural shift and starting to enjoy how philosophy was taught through images rather than through words. She's holding her hand in the image of the mudra of fearlessness that you would recognize from Shakyamuni Buddha, the way she's holding. And then the other hand is, one hand's like this, and the other hand is giving blessings. So you might start with just the mudras that you're familiar with from the Shakyamuni Buddha statues.
And I think it looks like there's no other questions coming up. So maybe if you have any closing words, we can start moving towards wrapping up the session for the evening.
Yes, our favorite bodhicitta prayer. Bodhicitta, excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. So thank you all for practicing together. I think you're on mute.
Yes, thank you. So thank you, Khenmo, for sharing your words and practice with us. And I think we can go ahead and close at this time with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time with our usual morning and evening live streams. And hopefully Venerable Khenmo Drolma will also join us again one of these days.
Lovely to see you and practice together. Thank you.